Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Ryan with Deepwood Handcraft. Today we're going to take a quick look at how to do the hidden seam pockets as can be seen on our canteen carriers, flat pockets, and with a gusset. I'm going to show you how I do both of these hidden seam pockets without being able to turn this inside out to sew it. So stay tuned, we're going to get right into this. But before we get started with this, a quick word on imitation. It is often said that imitation is the highest form of flattery. Well, that sounds good until you know what the definition of flattery is. I'm going to read it off my phone here. Excessive and insincere praise, especially that given to further one's own interests. So if somebody says, "Flattered, I'm sure," that's not a compliment. If somebody imitates my work, "I'm flattered," that's not a good thing. So, I'm going to move forward with these tutorials, or how I do's, however you want to put it, with the hope that I won't turn around and see my exact copies of the things that I'm making and selling. I'm not putting these tutorials out so that you can copy my aesthetic because you think my thing looks good. Have your own vision. Have your own vision. I don't care if you make canteen carriers with pockets on it. That's not what I'm talking about. I just think that you should do your own thing. Put your own spin on it. Make it look like you made it, not like I made it and you copied it. Some people might not understand or might not know or be in the know that that sort of thing is heavily frowned upon with the community of makers. If you see direct copies of your stuff in somebody else's store, that's not a compliment. I'm selling this to feed my family, and this is my vision and my aesthetic and my taste and my, I hate to use the word art, but that's kind of what it is. This is my art form coming through in my craftsmanship. And while I don't expect you to reinvent the wheel every time, I don't really care to see somebody else's work be a direct copy of what I'm making. It kind of puts a bad taste in my mouth, and it's not just me, it's kind of a thing known. Put your own spin on it. Make it look like you did it. Have your own aesthetic. Have your own opinion. So that being said, I'll move forward and make these tutorials. I expect to see some people copying because they just do things in poor taste, and that's just how it's going to be. I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but I would heavily encourage somebody that is intending to make a go of this, and a real go of it, to have your own view of how these things turn out. Copying people's work is going to shut a lot of doors right in your face, and you might not even realize it. You might not see it happen. You might not hear those conversations that go along behind people that could really promote you. I've had several conversations with people that could have done a lot for people's careers in this sort of thing, and I'll recommend somebody and they'll point out to me, nope, this thing that they make is a direct copy of this other person's hard work, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. And so whether you realize it or not, if you're copying someone else's look, feel, aesthetic, you might have some measured success and it might seem to go well for you, but you're only going to go so far because you're going on somebody else's vision, which means you're always going to be chasing them or somebody else. You're never going to be ahead of the curve because you're following somebody else's aesthetic. So, have your own vision, have your own product, take tips and pointers and techniques and aspects, that's all fine and good. Inspiration, that's all great, but make it your own. So, now that that's said, on to the useful information. Alright, so here it is. The secret of how to accomplish hidden seam pockets without being able to turn your pocket inside out. Now, this isn't really a secret, and some people might be a little disappointed by that. It's really just doing it. And we're using a saddle stitch for this because we use a saddle stitch for everything. Alright, so I already have my holes punched here. You can see that. I already have my holes punched here. Fabricate all this stuff in advance. Sorry if that kills the romanticism for you, but it's much faster for me to do it that way, so that's how I do it. So, we want this pocket to sit like this. We'll start it just like that. And we're going to sew this first line. Just like we would. Now I always backstitch my first 3 stitches. Because I believe in overdoing stuff. So, I'll show you again real quick. That's what we're aiming for. When this is finished, it's going to be laying like that. Alright, now I'll take a moment. When you're sewing soft leather on soft leather like this, it's important that your tension is right. Now on a sewing machine, your machine's going to have a tensioner that you can adjust with knobs and such. And so the machine will make it consistent every time. I often hear people say, well yeah, the stitches are loose, but it's handmade. If you have a handmade item and your stitches are loose, it's because either the person who sewed it didn't care, or they didn't know what they were doing, or they were a 10-year-old in a sweatshop somewhere in Pakistan. Just because it's handmade, your stitches should not be loose. Those stitches are not loose. These stitches are not loose. That's as tight as if a machine had done it. Every bit. And you can control that with how you're doing it. You don't want to over tighten it. Watch what happens when I over tighten this. Now you got a wee wall in there. You see that? But if you hold it between your fingers, I like to pinch down, not a death grip, but just firm. You can feel, I'll tug, just give a tug to both threads. That way I can feel if the leather is bunching up under my fingers, but I can also feel that it's good and tight. Now if I'm pulling this direction as opposed to this direction, it's going to pull all of these at least one or two back. It won't go all the way back, but a few stitches back in line. This is the direction you want to be pulling, is in the direction of your stitch. I'm going to be stitching this way, so I want to be pulling my thread this way. Kind of hard to see in the viewfinder, but so I'll pinch here and then I'll give it a little tug and make sure that it's tight after every stitch. And that way my stitches are going to come out tight. They're not going to be loose, they're not going to be overly tight. They're going to be right. And after you practice that for a minute, it just kind of becomes the action your hand takes every time. Somebody might say, well, you need to get yourself a stitching pony. No, I do not. This kind of thing doesn't lend well to a stitching pony. It just doesn't. At least not for me. If you like stitching pony, good, do what you like. So I'm going to finish this line, and then I'll show you what happens at the corner and turn in the corner. Alright. Now we're at the corner. This is going to finish like this. So how are we going to turn the corner and sew this stuff? It's not a secret, it's just to do it. It's just a matter of doing it. Most people won't do it because it's kind of a hassle. Some people will say that it's not worth it to do. And maybe for some people it's not. It does take a little more time. It is a frustration and a headache at times unless you've done it. Once you do it several times, it just kind of becomes another thing that you do. I like it. I think it's worth doing, so I do it. You might not be of the same opinion. So what I'm just going to do here is when this comes through, I'm just going to find the hole. And then once I turn this corner, one thing that's important is you want to make sure that your edges curl towards the inside. So that when this folds over, that edge is going to be curled in and under. Now what's going to happen here pretty quick is I'm not going to be able to hit both holes on a straight line with my needle. And the only secret to the whole thing is at that point I just start hitting one hole at a time with my needle. All my holes are already punched with a diamond chisel, which for you blokes over in Europe is not the same as a pricking iron. A pricking iron and a stitching chisel are two different tools. Pricking iron just marks your holes. I'm just going to clean up that corner so that it tucks right. Pricking iron marks your holes to be punched with your awl. A stitching chisel punches your holes. Pricking irons are much more expensive than stitching chisels because they're not made to be beat on, and they'll last you forever. Stitching chisels are a little bit cheaper because eventually the teeth will break off. And then a 6-hole punch becomes a 5-hole punch. I use these 4mm because it works out that on center it's about a 1/4 inch. And all of our stuff is marked on a 1/4 inch, so that's how that works out. So now, put it through this piece first. I'm still pliable enough that I can find that hole with it. Coming back through. Now we've turned that corner. And I'll just go ahead and show. I'll pull it through the first hole first. Then I'll put it in the second hole. Coming back through. Put it through the first hole first. Pull it all the way through. And then put it through. It just requires an extra motion. Sorry if this looks clumsy, but looking through this viewfinder, everything is backwards on the screen. So if I'm trying to watch what I'm doing so you can see it, it's like trying to cut your hair in the mirror. Sort of difficult. You can see at this point I still have all this open, so I can still kind of just hit the same hole. But once I turn this corner right here, it's going to get a lot more difficult to do it that way. But I've done this so much and practiced it so much that at this point, the difference for me as far as time goes is very minuscule. It doesn't take me much longer to do it this way than the other way because I've done it so often. It becomes a second nature thing. Figuring it out in the beginning wasn't quite as simple as that, because this wasn't something I found in a book and it wasn't something I looked up on YouTube. It was just something I wanted to accomplish, and so I worked at it until I figured it out. Not to say those resources aren't out there. I just couldn't find any. And I don't do this so often that it's a massive trade secret or anything. This doesn't set my work apart from somebody else's. Just something I think adds a nice touch to some of the work. And now we're coming to the point where we're turning this corner. So I'm going to start hitting one hole at a time. Come all the way through the hole on the piece or the pocket, and I'm going to go through the corresponding hole on the body. See how that corner wanted to pinch? Just kind of tuck it in and pull your stitch tight, and it'll stay. So now I'm going to come through the body hole and then back through the pocket hole. I'll make sure that tucked the way it was supposed to by putting my finger in there and just kind of pulling up on it.
coming through the body, going into the pocket.
And so, when you're looking at it like this, it almost looks like you're whip stitching, but you're not. You're stitching in a straight line, and when you pull this up, see if I can get an inside look. I can't, but you'll see from this other side, that ain't a whip, that's a straight line. If I can get the lighting right. So, sometimes you'll make that mistake of thinking that you're whipping around. You're not. This is a straight line moving this direction, both on the body and on the inside of the pocket. Now you're also going to notice that those stitches are loose here, and that's okay. That's kind of going to happen so that you can hit your holes as you go up. I don't like to get more than about that. 3 stitches just loose, and then every time what I'll do is I'll pull it tight like I want it tight, finished. And then what'll happen is when I go to do this one will loosen up, and this one will loosen up, and these will stay tight. And then when I pull them tight again, the further ones will tighten up like they should be. These will tighten up, but then these will loosen up again as I pull it to get these holes stitched. But then you're tightening as you go so that you don't end up with a loose stitch down here and you're all the way up here and you're pulling on it, but this isn't tightening up. So if you tighten it up every time as you go, these will stay tight down at the bottom as you move up. It'll be good. Another aspect of this is kind of sewing by feel. I'm not saying you should close your eyes while you sew or anything, but if you can get a feel for what is happening with your needle. In other words, you can feel if you're hitting the body or if you found a hole or if it's not going to go. You should never force anything, but you can kind of feel what's happening here. And a little patience goes a long way. And all of my patience gets spent doing leather work. Just joking. Alright, so I'm at the top of this other side. And as you can see, the stitches are all tight. It lays good and flat. And so now what I have to do is backstitch to finish my stitch off, and I'll show you that real quick. It's not terribly difficult. Just gonna open this up a little bit so that I can see the seam. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can. I can see the seam in there. Just going to find this hole with my needle, and because I can bend the whole thing around, one important aspect of this part is that you got to make sure this top stitch is tight when you double stitch. It's easy to loosen it up because you're coming back through it. But you've got to make sure that this top stitch is nice and tight, not overly tight. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down a few more.
And when I'm coming back through, my thumb is just on the other side of this. I can see this hole, obviously. I push it just through, just to touch my thumb. I've poked myself quite a few times, and you probably will too. But I know that it's gone in the right spot. And I'll push it on through. Grab it up and tighten it. I can see at least one more. So this will be the third. And now I'm done with this line, so I'm going to pull that needle off. I'm going to take this needle and come back through to close this stitch. And then I can just see that fourth hole. I'm not afraid to kind of get in there, expose it. Got my finger behind there to push it kind of out of the tops there so I can see it well. So now that's finished. Just a bit of the sticker. I don't know why they put stickers on this stuff. It rarely comes off. But it's on the inside at the bottom. Let me carry it. En France, parlez-vous François? No. So now to finish this, this is how I do it. I don't tie any special knots. I don't dab any glue. I'll clip that off about 1/4 of an inch. And then very responsibly and very carefully, which way is the flame going to go? It's always going to go straight up. If I hold my lighter like this, the flame is going to go straight up. So what I want to make sure of is that the flame, whatever direction it's pointing, which will be up, doesn't hit my leather and it doesn't hit my other stitches. I only want it to hit the tip of this piece. So without watching the camera, I'm going to make sure exactly that happens. Now the way I ensure that is that I hold the leather and the stitching away from where the flame is going to point, which is straight up. You can see that catches fire and it's going to burn itself down. Now that's done. Now I have calluses on my fingers, so that I didn't even feel the heat of it. You gotta let it cool for a sec, blow on it, but you don't want to wait too long or you won't be able to smash it flat. Now I have burned myself doing this multiple times. It's worth it to me to do. So that's done now. And that's not coming off there unless you absolutely want it to. And by that I mean aggressively, with cutting implements. So, 2 side pockets are done. I've sewn this lid on ahead of time. Now I'll show you how to do this piece. Alright, so I've already sewn this one inside out like you would anything that you're gonna flip to have it right side out. This is how all the coffee bags are done, how all the tender pouches are done. Most of this stuff, this is going to get sewn inside out when I'm putting it together. I'll sew this inside out and end up flipping the whole thing right side out when I'm done. So to do the pocket with the gusset, it's the same thing. I sewed it inside out to begin with. And so what's going to happen now is I'm going to do this the exact same way that I did these side pockets. It's just going to be easier because I have lots more room to work with. So when it's done, this is going to be sitting like this. These seams are going to be tucked inside. So what I'm going to do is start it like this. Did we see that? Yeah, we did. Alright. So, it's going to be sitting like this. These seams are going to be, the edges are going to be on the inside of this pocket. So it's going to be like that. So I'm going to start it like that. So that as I work my way down and around, that's what we're going to get. This is how Al Stolman says to thread your needle. I am very much obliged to agree, because that way you don't pull your needle off the end of your thread. Now, because of the way I do this lid, this all starts up here in the veg tan. Okay, so I've got my first 3 clumsily started and back stitched. These are all double stitched. Now I'm just going to work on down this line until I hit the corner, like I did on the other one. Okay, so getting ready to turn this corner again. It's going to be a little bit different than it was on the other, because there is no defined corner on the gusset. It's just a straight piece, but this will be what decides, because it's marked on the body to match the front panel. So it's a little bit easier to manipulate your needles in regards to the body on this one, because you have a lot more space to work with here. I'm going to go ahead and flip this around now so that we're not fighting the lid. So as we turn this corner, it's a little easier to manipulate because we have more room. So I can still just hit the both holes every time I'm putting through. Though sometimes it's easy to stop once you've got your needle through and just look at where your hole is. Same kind of deal. Just requires you to pay a little more attention. So you can see we've turned that corner. But because this has a gusset on it, we can kind of still work for a while with it inside out. It gives us a little more room. Just so long as we make sure that our edge doesn't get funny, that it's always tucking to the inside as we go. Okay, so now we're approaching this other corner. It's always good to look as you go. This has all gone well. It's looking good. We don't have any loose stitches. Looks good on the back. So now what I've done is I've just kind of made sure that it's taken the shape that it's going to be in. I'm not going to be sewing it inside out anymore. Kind of going to be approaching it like I was the other one, where I kind of just do one hole at a time. Once again, you want to make sure this corner does what it's supposed to. I can see that the needle's going in that hole. So all I'm doing is I'm kind of pinching just to give it a little firming up so I can push it on through there without running into any trouble. Alright, so I'm all the way up to the top. That all looks good. Backstitching this one's going to be a little bit difficult because I've got to go through the fetch tan portion. But it's also going to be a little bit easier because I've got a little more room to work with. So I can just kind of lay this to the side until I've accomplished. I'm going to use the Leathermans for these. Now I'm just backstitching. I'll typically backstitch 7 stitches. That can be a bit difficult to accomplish on these hidden seam pockets. So long as I can get a good 3 or 4, I'll be satisfied with that. And so now that this is tied up here with a couple of back stitches, I got 3 on it so far, I can aggressively maneuver this without fear that it's going to loosen up because it is already tight from the top. Now I just like to work around the seam, kind of making sure it's all evened out, kind of give it a little bit of a stretch, flatten it out a little bit. And then I like to roll this seam a little bit. And you can see, hand stitched, those seams are not loose. They're not overly tight. Pay attention to the details. Care about what you're doing, and it'll come out right.
Okay, so as you can see, that's not terribly difficult. It does take a little bit of extra concentration and paying attention and holding your mouth just right. Otherwise, some of you might find that it's not worth it to do. Some of you might find that it's worth it to do. I personally don't have a problem with it. I like the way that it comes out. And it's not too much trouble for me personally, so I do it. So, this was my first how-to tutorial, whatever you want to call it, video. Leave your feedback in the comments below. I want to know how I did. What could I do differently? Bad lighting and all that aside. Did I explain it well enough? Did I not explain it well enough? Would you like to see different angles or different shots? That kind of thing. So, like, share, comment. That's it for me. Have a good day.